I'm Michael Krigsman, industry analyst and host of CXOTalk. And we are at FutureStack 16, which is New Relic's conference here in San Francisco. And I have the privilege of talking with Mikey Butler, who is the Senior Vice President of Engineering at New Relic. Hey, Mikey, how are you?
Good, Michael. How you doing? It's an honor to be here.
Well, thank you so much. So, you run engineering at New Relic, and very briefly, what does that encompass?
Well, it basically encompasses two large responsibilities. One is actually putting product out the door, and approximately 2/3 of the 200 people that report to me focus on putting product out the door, and 1/3 focus on actually keeping the site up. As you know, we're a SaaS offering, so we've got 24/7, 365 responsibility, so 1/3 of the team is focused on that. And that's what we do day in and day out.
You have spent a lot of time thinking about what we might call a high-performing engineering team and the culture around that. So please share with us your thoughts.
Okay. I would classify my thinking into two sort of buckets, and I use the phrase reactive and proactive. Reactive tends to be the typical blocking and tackling that we're all familiar with. Getting engineers to produce code more quickly, having it get through the test cycle more quickly, having it aggregate into a release more quickly with lower friction. That's the reactive side of things, and that typically is where it tends to end in most organizations. I was blessed in the case of New Relic to have a very forward-thinking boss, my boss, Jim Gochi, who's the Chief Product Officer, and he decided to do something very bold, and I was more than happy to sign up for it. And that's something we call Project Upscale, and it's a complete redo of how we do engineering, and it is very state-of-the-art. And so what we are trying to do with Upscale is to rethink completely what is the business of an engineering team. It's more than putting product out the door. It's actually properly targeting the efforts of a team, which roughly is 6 people, across all disciplines, so managers, product managers, team leads, and individual engineers, having them focus on the right things, and at the same time having them align with their passions. If I hand out a remit to a team and say, I want you to work on X, some percentage of that team may be interested in that, some percentage won't be interested in that, but what we've created with Upscale is a sequence or a set of desired deliverables, typically 12 to 15 of them, and said, all right, of the 40 teams you have, select which one of these you want to work on. And why do you want to work on it? And tell us what's in it for the business. We then go back, we look at their proposals, we bless some, we say no, try again with others. And when the dust settles, we actually have a good match between what the business needs and what people have as passion. And therefore, as you well know, if someone's passionate about something, you get a lot more out of it than if they're just in it to turn the crank and do their job.
So it's a very systematic way of creating a culture where people feel highly invested in the work that they do.
Absolutely. For example, one of the nuances there, to give you just how far we took it, we actually gave all 250 or so of our engineers and product managers the opportunity to select which team they were on. It caused actually a lot of anxiety inside of the company when we told our CEO, and luckily he basically signed up for it. But in the beginning we said, yeah, we're going to basically let everybody decide what job they want to do. It's like, oh my God, how long will that take to settle? And what will happen on the other side of that? What will happen to product going out the door? All of that turned out to let's say, work out perfectly. It couldn't have been more of a textbook perfect outcoming. But we actually let people decide what team they're going to be on, and every 6 months or so they get a chance to select another team. The advantage to us is that we know the passion is aligned. The advantage for the individual is that as they follow their passions, they don't have to leave the company. That there's a guaranteed opportunity every 6 months or so to align yourself with your passions, and as you know, in the technology space, that happens pretty often and very fast. And so people tend to stay much longer. Our attrition rates are far below average as a result of making this move.
So many companies find that making this kind of change is difficult because change is hard. So would you share with us some of the lessons and the things that you've learned that make it work?
Yeah. Well, part of it is just good old-fashioned gumption. The management team is going to sit in the middle of what will seem like a firestorm once you start this up. You're going to go down the path, and even the engineering team is going to have doubts about what you did. Certainly the teams around you that depend on the engineering team will see this as a moment of chaos, and you kind of have to just kind of gut yourself through that. Find courage and intestinal fortitude, when you need it, and wrap your heart around the vision, and keep that whole to yourself and to the team. And that actually carried us through. The interesting thing is we hired a consultant to come on board. He's done this with about a dozen other companies, and they all have about the same journey, which is it is so easy to innovate the technology and the tools, and far more difficult to innovate how teams do their work. And so that tends to be an exception case in our industry, and therefore tends to push a lot of what I'll call the organizational calculus to its limit. But if you can go there and get through that, the upside is tremendous.
How did you ensure that trust was part of that organizational calculus? Because without trust, this would not have worked.
Yes, and so trust was greatly enhanced by us looking at all of the 40 teams and asking them to elect representatives to actually drive the process. So management did not prescribe the outcome. We actually gave the team a set of business problems. We need the business priorities observed. We want teams passionate about what they do. We want them to have specific charters about what they do. And we said, you go off and you design the system that responds to these constraints in the most effective way. So not only was it a better outcome than we would have designed had we been, sitting in our ivory tower as management, but it got the buy-in of the team because their representatives were working with them to fine-tune as they went along. So that built a lot of trust.
And finally, New Relic is a very data-oriented company.
Yes.
And so what's the data that you look at? How do you know that you're successful at this?
Well, that's actually a big challenge. So we tend to drink our own champagne in New Relic. And so all along the process of building code and deploying code, we actually are using the Insights product and the Analytics for Everyone platform to continuously gather data. For me, this was actually one of the reasons I came to New Relic. It was one of these things. I spent a lot of time studying information theory when I was in school, and there's a correlation between how often things change, how fast they change, how frequently they change, or that's the size of change, and the sampling rate that you need. And what we were finding is that if you actually use the old school method of what I call metrics-based analysis, that you have to know ahead of time what you're interested in measuring. With event-based and the insights-based product, you don't know what you want to measure ahead of time. You just measure everything, and then you have, essentially the full data cube that you can spin wherever you want and slice it any way you want after the fact when you know what the question really is. And so that's what we depend on. We just, you heard that we're getting something on the order of 25 trillion events per quarter into the New Relic NRDB backend system. We're probably responsible for a good percentage of that inside of our engineering organization. I don't know the percentage, but we use it a lot. And what we do is essentially gather data all about the entire assembly line and how teams are operating. And then at periodic reviews, we extract that data, rotate the data cube, slice it the way we want, and basically get some very, very interesting insights that we couldn't possibly have gotten if we hadn't used our own tool.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
We've been talking with Mikey Butler, who is the Senior Vice President of Engineering at New Relic.